Welcome back to Ascend Legal 101. Today we are joined by lawyer Lorenzo Oss-Cech, who is a partner with the firm Hutchison, Oss-Cech and Marlatt. Lorenzo has 30 years' experience in brain injury settlements, general civil litigation, ICBC injury claims, medical malpractice, construction and building litigation, wealth management and estate planning, employment law, and corporate securities litigation. Having lived in numerous countries, Lorenzo is fluent in 4 languages. He's very involved in community activism and volunteering and is currently a board member and legal counsel for the David Foster Foundation.
Welcome back to Ascend Legal 101. I'm Ramona, and today we're speaking with Lorenzo Oss-Cech, who's a partner with the law firm of Hutchison, Oss-Cech, Marlatt. Lorenzo and I did this interview shortly after ICBC's enhanced care coverage came into effect on May 1st. And I sat on this interview for a few days because when Lorenzo and I were speaking, he brought up a number of points about inequities under this system that I hadn't previously considered at all. And I hadn't anticipated my personal reaction to those inequities. My views going into this interview were very myopic, and I had to allow myself some time to consider Lorenzo's points and do some further research before I posted the video. And I note some interesting new cases that are coming down from the Supreme Court of British Columbia. So here's our original discussion surrounding ICBC's enhanced care coverage. And I'm going to invite Lorenzo back to speak to me after we see how some of this has played out, because I'm really interested in how this moves forward. And I'd also like to speak with somebody directly from ICBC. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more videos like this and this continued discussion. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today, Lorenzo.
Thank you for having me, Ramona. It's nice to see you again. Yeah, there have been some major changes to the way ICBC deals with injured people.
So can you tell me that my understanding is that how we deal with injured people has changed, and then how law firms deal with ICBC has changed. Can you tell me about the changes in both of those aspects?
Sure. There was a change about 2 years ago on April 1st, 2019, where a minor injury cap was brought in, legislation for that, where there were classifications of injuries from minor to severe. The legislation is quite comprehensive. It's not very clear. 4 of our lawyers did a pretty deep dive on it, and we found it difficult to discern exactly what the legislation meant. It hasn't been challenged to any great extent in the courts yet. We think that it will be, and that the courts are going to throw out a big part of it, but that's ready to be seen when that happens. That scheme was in place until just recently, May 1st, where a complete no-fault system was brought in. And that means that the way ICBC is going to deal with car crash victims is very much akin to a work-safe system, where you have statutory rights and they're all delineated within that statute. We haven't started doing a deep dive on it quite yet. We will, but the legislation is approximately 2 feet thick all told. So we're, as lawyers that have protected injured people for 30 years myself, we're quite concerned that people are not going to be well represented as they would otherwise be. In particular, it eliminates the tort system completely. So any ability for an injured person to sue for recovery. And that's going to make it very, very difficult for anyone to obtain legal representation, because they will have to pay by the hour. And that is very prohibitive for most people. And so they're going to be left at the mercy of adjusters who will tell the injured people what they can and cannot do, or can or cannot receive. And sometimes that is not the best possible outcome for an injured person.
And so if ICBC adjusters are approving all the benefits or approving your
care, I suppose I would have to ask somebody from ICBC this, but do adjusters get special training? Or, I mean, how do you know somebody is qualified to make those decisions on your behalf if they're
Well,
adjusters as opposed to?
that is definitely a concern. And as far as I know, adjusters don't get any medical training. They often make decisions based on their past knowledge, I guess, and sometimes biases. Obviously, they will be guided by certain medical practitioners that review the files. But the experience that we've had, for example, with WorkSafe, a lot of the time it's a document review as opposed to actually seeing the person and deciding what need that person has. In the past, when the old system was in place, the person's doctor, the person's chiropractor or physiotherapist would be the one making the recommendations. And since they don't have a stake in it, they would recommend properly and without reservation if somebody needed treatment. We will see what happens in the future. But as a group, we're very concerned that the public is not going to be well taken care of when they're injured.
Right. And can I just throw a scenario at you? What if I were in a car accident and I had somebody dealing with my ongoing care? You know, how would I manage my own care then? Would I just have to be so in touch with my doctor? Or there's pitfalls to all of it, right? So what happens next?
Well, basically you have, for lack of better expression, and pardon the expression, but it's a meat chart in terms of what you can get, what type of benefits you're entitled to, and they're all statutorily dictated. Like I said, we haven't done a deep dive on the legislation that just came out on May 1st just yet. Our preliminary review is such that ICBC and the legislation, basically the government dictates what amount you can get compensated for in terms of any loss of income. And for treatment, there's specific amounts that are payable to specific practitioners. And either those practitioners abide by those amounts, or you will have to pay additional for any difference. But it's all going to be mandated by ICBC and the adjuster as to how many treatments you can get, and the legislation sets it out.
Right. So I guess the adjuster decides then when I'm cured. I know that there's also certain kinds of therapies they don't cover. So
yes.
I'm petrified, I'm paranoid, I'm looking in my rearview mirror all the time now. So I need counseling. Well, I prefer going to a different kind of a therapy, like hypnotherapy, because I find that effective. But ICBC doesn't cover that. So who gets to decide then what is the best treatment for me?
Well, you don't get to decide what the best treatment is for you. You get to choose what treatments they offer, and those treatments are, like I said, statutorily delineated, and that's it. Your doctor is not going to have a great deal of input. At the end of the day, there's a number of treatments for example, physiotherapy that you're entitled to. And then they make a decision as to whether you can have more or not. And in the past, our experience has been that, once they cut you off, regardless of whether you might need some more, or whether there's a recommendation for some more.
So my understanding is that this enhanced care system sort of prolongs that system of care where they'll pay forever, if you need it, but the element of pain and suffering, so other heads of damages are gone. Can you tell me what's disappeared?
Well, basically, you can no longer sue for pain and suffering. In the old system, you had a two-pronged attack. One is that you had your benefits under the regulations, Part 7's benefits. And then on the other side of the coin, you had the ability to sue in a tort system for pain and suffering, for loss of income, for loss of future income, for cost of future care. That is all gone. You can no longer do that. Again, there is a meat chart that is delineated in the legislation, and the powers that be at ICBC decide where you fall into depending on your injuries. Like I said, we haven't done a deep dive on the legislation, so I'm not going to be able to give you chapter and verse as to what is recoverable or not, but that portion is definitely gone.
Right. So I worry about people like who are brain injured, for example. I suppose that's in the legislation.
Yeah, there are provisions for severely injured people for their recovery, for their care. But in the long term, those people will suffer losses that are not going to be covered within this legislation.
So what do you say to people who say, I'm just going to push the little button here for a minute. What do you say to the people who say, oh good, the lawyers are cut out now, so all the bloodsuckers are gone, we're going to save all this money?
Well, that's a point of view that people can hold. The system worked before. Trial Lawyers Association has fought this, but obviously we weren't successful in doing that. Representation for people that are vulnerable it's a pretty harsh comment to say that they're bloodsuckers, because many years ago people were able to retain lawyers on a contingency basis, and they had to pay by the hour, which was prohibitive. And then the Law Society allowed lawyers to take cases on a contingency, and people were compensated fairly for many years. The system worked. Personally, I don't believe that ICBC was in the quagmire that the government made it out to be. I think a lot of the funds from ICBC went to different parts of the government, and they're spouting now that there's huge savings already, which makes no sense really, because all the claims that are going to be adjudicated post May 1st haven't even commenced. And the ones that were commenced after April 1st, again, a lot of them haven't been dealt with. And the majority of the cases that ICBC is dealing with right now are under the old system. So the fact that they're saying that they've already seen savings seems very unusual to me.
Right. Well, I have to say, I'm the first one to pile on lawyers, because I know them so well. So if I see anybody who perhaps isn't earning their paycheck, I'm not shy about calling them out. And when I hear people talk about cutting the lawyers out, it kind of it doesn't make me mad, but I know how hard people work in law firms, and I know the abuse that they take sometimes from their clients who are very injured. Because we always see clients who are having a really hard time. So they're really nice people usually. If we met them anywhere else, we'd probably like them. And it's not that we don't like them, but we're dealing with them when they're at their worst and lowest. So, you're earning your paycheck for sure.
There's no doubt that the people that we deal with are in a vulnerable state. And when they're in a vulnerable state, the playing field is not level when they're dealing with a large corporation. We see it regularly with WorkSafe, where people are denied their rights, they're denied their disability benefits on a whim. And a lot of the time, what we see is a document review by their in-house doctors or staff doctors, which are ridiculous positions that they've taken. And we're concerned that that's going to be the same through this no-fault system, where people are going to have to fight for their rights, but are not going to have the ability to retain lawyers to do so, because they're going to have to pay by the hour. And again, unfortunately, people with means are going to be able to fight it. And they're going to be able to retain a lawyer and say, no, this is not right. People without means are not going to be so able to do it.
Right. And so I hadn't thought of that aspect, right? So then we have this imbalance or inequity in sort of social positions. From my own experience, what I see is a lot of times clients don't fully recover until their matter is resolved in whatever way that is. So by trial, mediation, the file is settled. There's that level of stress that goes away. Perhaps it's the same, in any sort of traumatic event. Well, even if you're buying a house, we see in law firms, right? People are crazy, and then closing day, everything's done, and then, whew, the stress goes away, and you can move forward. So how do you see this working for people who are injured and they have this ongoing relationship with ICBC?
Well, I agree with you, and you and I have worked together in the past, and there is a catharsis for people to go through the process and then close their file. And yes, almost all of my clients have that experience, that after their file is closed, there is a burden lifted off of them, even though they're represented, and pretty much their only job is to go to treatment and get better. And the law firms take care of the rest. I think that it's going to be much added stress for a person not only to deal with their injuries, but also deal with the corporation trying to get their treatment paid for, trying to get more treatment, and having that as an added burden to their injuries. In terms of whether they're going to have the same experience at the end, possibly if they get better and they move along, that could happen as well, I would imagine. But I'm more concerned about the person dealing with the injuries and dealing with the bureaucracy at the same time.
Right. I'm really concerned about that as well. WCB is a perfect example. I still, to this day, see a client from the 90s on the street collecting bottles when he got cut off from WCB. Lost his family, lost his house, lost everything. And
It's very tough. I mean, we do WCB work. We have one of our associates that is a specialist in that area, and he does very good work. But again, out of 10 cases that come his way, he probably takes one based on the merits, and also based on whether the person can pay for his time and whether it's worth it for him to fight, for him or her to fight that fight. And a lot of them just cannot afford it. It's simple as that, and they're left to deal with WorkSafe on their own, which is not, at the end of the day, it's not a fair fight.
Right. So I just switching gears for a minute, even though I know that client care you even have people in your office who specialize in just client care, taking them through the going to therapy. And so just moving away from that for a minute and looking at the way law firms are structured. And really I'm asking you to look in a crystal ball. And this is kind of an aside from the general ICBC thing, is I think, law firms have invested a lot in an infrastructure where they deal with ICBC. How do you see that changing? Like right now, I don't see that changing at all. But, how do you see that changing over time? Like, how is this going to affect your firm, say?
Well, our firm is multifaceted. We do everything from employment to estate litigation. I do a lot of construction litigation as well, commercial litigation. So we were not per se a firm that exclusively did personal injury. There are firms like that, and they will have to pivot hard to survive, because obviously a big part of their revenue stream is gone. For us, we will just concentrate and shift into more of the other areas. Once we have a look, and like I said, a deep dive to the legislation that's in place as of May 1st, we will see whether there's any possibility to represent clients within that structure. I don't think so, but I'm going to hold out once we do our firm retreat, which is going to be concentrating on figuring out the structure that is in place now. But yes, there are going to be a lot of law firms that are going to have to pivot in a different direction. And there's a lot of good lawyers out there. I'm sure they'll survive. But it just, it doesn't affect just lawyers. It affects all other facets of society, apart from the injured people. But it affects physiotherapists, massage therapists, chiropractors, doctors that do independent medical examinations. All sorts of different facets of society are being affected by the no fault.
Right. Well, what I'd like to know is, have I missed anything? Is there something that you feel is really important that I haven't asked you or we haven't touched on?
No, not really. I mean, the only thing that I can say is that I think British Columbians were lulled to sleep on this issue. And there was a lot of misinformation published about the old system, and now we're stuck with what we have, and that's something that speaks to our society needs to be more engaged, more interested in what our government is doing, and speak up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I just want to acknowledge you, Lorenzo, because as you said, we have worked together, so I know what you're like to work with, and I know with and for, and I know how much your clients, how important they are to you, and how you treat them, and how respectful you are to all the people who are around you. So I just want to thank you for your time, and to thank you for being sort of that bar. Because, sometimes even, I don't want to get sappy or anything, but I can probably say there's like 5 lawyers that I can think of who I can count on, absolutely. And you're one of them. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Ramona. I appreciate your words. I've been doing this for a long, long time, for almost 30 years now. And having been the survivor of a very bad car accident myself, I tend to empathize with the people that come my way, and it's a pleasure to help them through the process and help them get better and go on with their lives.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ramona.